We're going to continue looking at organelles, only now we're not going to be concentrating on the nucleus. We're just going to be looking at organelles that are outside of the nucleus. These would be ones that are in the cytoplasm. One of them is called vesicles. A vesicle is just a sac. It's made up of cell membrane material, the phospholipids and such. And I'll show you some vesicles in some of the pictures that we have. We have different types of vesicles. You can have some that have a coated outside to them, might be for protection here. You could have a vesicle that doesn't have that coating, and they can contain different materials. For instance, food, or that could be some type of a water droplets. It'd be a variety of different things that these vesicles hold, and they move about inside of the cell in the cytoplasm. Another important organelle, this is called smooth endoplasmic reticulum. We will abbreviate it as ER, which stands for endoplasmic reticulum. And the reason this one is smooth is by its appearance. When they saw this under a microscope, a group of scientists realized that this one doesn't have any ribosomes attached to the surface, and so therefore it does have a smooth appearance. That would be this right here. Whereas the rough ER, which we'll talk about later, has ribosomes attached to the surface, and so therefore it looks bumpy, and so it'll be called rough ER. The job for the smooth ER is that it makes lipids, and it has another job too we'll talk about on the next slide. So two jobs. One of them is to make lipids, and some of the lipids that they would make would be the phospholipids. Phospholipids, remember, are the head with the two tails. One part likes water, that would be this part. One part does not, and that is what all of your cell membrane is made up of, is phospholipids. Steroids would be another lipid that the smooth ER makes. If we take a look at its second job, it also detoxifies your blood from any drugs and or poisons. These could be legal or illegal. Anytime you take a over-the-counter ibuprofen or Advil or anything like that, it would stay in your body forever if your body didn't eventually start to break it apart and filter it back out of your blood. So that is the job of this organelle. There are large amounts of them in the liver. The liver's job is to kind of detoxify your blood. That's why a lot of the times people who do a lot of heavy drinking will sometimes have liver problems, and that is because the overworking of your smooth ER. We already saw a picture of the rough ER, and we'll see another one here in just a second. But the rough ER, again called rough because of the dots, the ribosomes that are on it. This is the way it looks underneath a microscope. So the rough ER is the green little ribbons that you see, and the little dots that are connected to it would be the smooth ER. You can also see, would be the ribosomes. The dots are the ribosomes. You can see a few free ribosomes here just out in the cytoplasm as well. Its job is to modify proteins, and modify means to change something. So it's going to take the ribosomes make proteins, and the job of the rough ER is then to take that protein that's been made and make modifications to it. Once the modifications are done, the rough ER is going to create vesicles. And so on the rough ER here, you might see a vesicle forming that has the proteins inside of it. And then that vesicle will bud off and travel through the cytoplasm to another organelle that we'll look at on the next slide called the Golgi apparatus. And so we could kind of map out where proteins travel. Proteins are made on the ribosome. From there they move into the rough ER to be modified, and from the rough ER they move to the Golgi apparatus. So if we look at the Golgi apparatus, this is more of a cartoon picture of what the Golgi looks like. It is, these are all separate layers. There's no connections here, and they kind of are flattened pancakes. They kind of curve there on the edge. So sometimes when I draw this, I make it look like that. So sometimes they're touching, sometimes they don't. But the Golgi apparatus modifies the proteins further, so it makes more modifications. And it also will store that product, and by product we're talking about the protein. Okay? And it will modify and store the protein that the ER has then sent it. It will then send those modified proteins out to other cells. And the protein from there in the vesicle will travel through your bloodstream to wherever it needs to go. This is what the Golgi bodies, sometimes called Golgi bodies, Golgi apparatus, what it looks like underneath a microscope. And they've obviously been stained. They're not really green, but it's quite a large stack of them. And you have more than one in each cell. So one cell could have 3, 12, depending on what type of cell it is. Some have more than others. I like to think of the Golgi apparatus as the post office. It is going to manufacture, sort, store, and ship material out. In this case, it does that with protein. So just like your post office will take your letters and it sorts them, it might store them to be delivered to your home or put into a post office box, and then it also will ship packages out. The Golgi apparatus does those same things, only with proteins. Another organelle that we'll look at are lysosomes, and the job of lysosomes is to digest macromolecules. So it will digest carbs or lipids, proteins, even nucleic acids. It will even digest old organelles that are kind of losing their usefulness. And this is what a lysosome looks like right here. So not much more than just a circle. It has a lot of enzymes in it, digestive things. That's what the dark area is. Lysosomes are special to animals, so in the plant picture that we'll look at in class, you would not want to even look for lysosomes on that side. They are on the animals only. Your white blood cells will defend the body from bacteria, and they do that by kind of surrounding it and engulfing the bacteria and then destroying it. And they do that because the white blood cells have quite a few lysosomes, and those lysosomes then can destroy the bacteria. Think of it as like a garbage disposal. It's the cleanup crew, sometimes referred to as the cleanup crew. This is another lysosome, and here you can see something that has come into the cell, whatever that is. And you can see the lysosomes have all these little dots in them to represent the digestive juices, digestive enzymes. And so the lysosome will kind of merge with your food vacuole or whatever this might be. It could be some type of a bacteria that's entered into the cell as well. Those enzymes will go into that food vacuole or go into that bacteria, will start to break it apart, decompose it, and eventually you'll have waste material that you can eliminate out into the bloodstream, and your body will filter that and clean it and excrete it. There is a genetic disorder called Tay-Sachs disease. This is a certain lipid that we all have. We need to have the enzyme that helps us digest this particular lipid, and a person with Tay-Sachs is born without that enzyme. And so because that enzyme is missing, they don't have the lysosome, the enzyme in that lysosome to digest the lipid, and they will start to accumulate that lipid. There's no way to get rid of it because of that the missing enzyme in the lysosome, and therefore they can have a lot of brain impairment and eventually leads to death. Vacuoles are another very important organelle. There's two different vacuoles that I'm going to look at here. There's the contractile vacuole, and you would find these in plants, okay, not so much in animals. You might also find them in water, one-celled critters that live in water, paramecium, for example. The contractile vacuole is a pump, and so these, in this case, it has two contractile vacuoles. Anytime there's extra water, its job is to pump the extra water out so that the cell doesn't drown from the inside. It can get enough water that it could burst or be destroyed. So the contractile vacuole will do that. So we have that one. The other type of vacuole, and this is the one that's going to be on the test, okay, central vacuole. This is the one that you can see very easily in a plant cell because it is very large. It usually takes up maybe a third of the picture of inside the plant. So it's really big. So plants only have one, and like I mentioned, it's really large. Animals have vacuoles as well, central vacuoles, but they're usually a lot smaller, and they might have maybe 3 or 4 of them instead of just one. The job of the central vacuole is a little different. The job is to pretty much be a storage container. So it's going to hold extra food, extra water, extra ions like salt particles, sodium and chlorine ions, and things like that. The mitochondria's job is another important one. I keep saying they're all important, but really if one of these isn't working, then the whole cell isn't functioning properly. So they're all important. This is what the mitochondria would look like from more of a real microscopic type picture. It has these, we'll call them cristae, that's what they're going to be called here in the notes, that stick out from the wall. Okay, here's another picture. So it's like this maze inside the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is very important for cellular respiration. This is where you take your food and oxygen and you make energy. You can't make energy without the mitochondria. So sometimes the mitochondria will be referred to as the powerhouse of the cell, and that's because that's where the majority of your energy comes from. This is found in almost every eukaryotic cell, and that's because eukaryotic cells need to make energy, therefore they need mitochondria. That includes plants, so this is animals and plants, definitely. It has two layers that surround it, so it has two phospholipids like your cell membrane does, so it's a very protected organelle. And I did mention the cristae. Those are the inner membranes of your mitochondria. You can see a better picture here. It actually starts from the wall and they come inward. And so for something to travel in here, it has to really weave back and forth to get through the inside of your mitochondria. And the cristae, because of how much they stick out, the folds that they have increase the surface area where work can happen, and so by doing that, by increasing the surface area, you can actually provide more energy than if all of those walls were gone. So the cristae provide a really large work surface. There's just another picture. So their job is to use food and oxygen and to make energy, like I put on the last slide. Food plus oxygen equal energy. The last one for this video is the chloroplast, and the chloroplast is a plants only, anything that does photosynthesis, so it doesn't have to just be a land plant. There are photosynthetic water plants as well. This would be one chloroplast. There's a lot of these discs in here. Every single one of these little thin things is a disc, so this is actually probably hundreds of them all stacked on top of each other, so it makes it look very dark. These are found in plants and algae, like I mentioned, and their job is to use the sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to make food, which is the main job of photosynthesis. So you have sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, and when you have all three of those, you get food. So plants don't eat the way you and I eat breakfast, lunch, and supper. They would do the photosynthesis through this organelle in order for them to be able to have the food that they need. In this picture that shows you the color, you can see that one cell doesn't just have one chloroplast in it. It might have 50 chloroplasts in it, and they're very small. Sometimes they're up toward the walls, sometimes they're in the middle, so they can move around within the cytoplasm, but they are green. This one is specifically green, and that's because of a pigment that it contains called chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll is green, and that's why most leaves look green, is because of the amount of chlorophyll in each one of the leaf cells. Lastly here, it's surrounded by two layers, so again it's very well protected, just like the mitochondria. And you can see the two layers here that it has around it. The thylakoid would be what you would call one single sac. So one single disc right here would be a thylakoid. This next one underneath it, one thylakoid. So each individual disc. The granum, sometimes called grana, it's a stack of thylakoids. You can see the whole entire stack might have like 10 of them there. That's called grana. And then very similar to the cytoplasm, this liquidy material around that they sit inside of, that was called the stroma, and the stroma is where some of that photosynthesis work is going to be taking place.